Okay, so we're at 1 o'clock, so we're going to start our official getting started. So welcome, everybody. My name is Mattia Marquardt. I'm the Director of Administration for the online campus here at Columbia School of Social Work. And I'm going to do a very brief intro to Adobe Connect in case there's anyone here who has not used it before. And I know a couple people mentioned that this is their first online event, so hopefully this will be useful. So if you're on Google Chrome, you might want to log off and come back in on a different browser if you start to experience problems, because Google Chrome is the only browser that doesn't really work with Adobe Connect very well. And to log out, you just need to close your browser. We've got our chat pod here, and we've already got a fantastic conversation going in chat, and I hope that you will keep that up. And I do want to say typos are perfectly fine in chat. No one expects perfect typing. So don't let that hold you back. If you need to change your chat size, if you would like it to be larger, you can make it larger by going to the menu here and then clicking on text size and then clicking on whatever font size would be easier for your eyes. And then conversely, if you don't like chat, you can cover it up with a Post-it note. Any color Post-it note will do. And we'll say things out loud if they're relevant to everybody. To download the handouts, everyone always asks, well, can you have the slides? Yes, you can have the slides now, or we'll send them out afterwards. And you can get them here on the left. Just click on the slide that you want, and then, or the handout that you want, and then click on Download Files. We've got a reading list from Professor Michalopoulos. We've got some info about the online campus, and we've got upcoming events as well as the slides. And we always get questions about how do I respond to a poll, because we'll have some more polls later. Just all you have to do is, if it's a short answer poll, you just type your answer and then click on Submit here, or hit Enter on your keyboard. If it's a multiple choice, just click on one of the circles. And if it's a multiple answer where you can pick as many as you like, click on as many boxes as you like. And you'll know that we got your response because it'll either say the answer is submitted, or you'll see a circle in the circle or a check in the box. And we just ask at this time, please have a nice, respectful, civil conversation. This is a School of Social Work, and we really encourage dialogue, but civil and respectful dialogue. So with that, I would like to invite up Marilea Coxawanahara, our Director of Marketing and Communication. And she's going to come up on webcam. And here she comes. Welcome.
Fun. Thank you, Mattia. And I see, Jared, you're already on. I was going to introduce you to come on.
Okay.
But you're here, so thank you, everybody, for joining us. As Mattia said, I'm Marilea Coxawanahara. I'm Director of Marketing and Communications for Columbia University's School of Social Work. And I'm not a social worker, but the best part of my job is getting to meet graduates who are doing some extraordinary things with their MSWs. And I started this online event series about a year ago because I thought their stories deserved to be shared with a wider audience, not just me. And today's featured guest, Jarrett Schechter, is a great example of that. Hi, Jarrett. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Have you recovered from your flight to New York?
I have, yes. I'm feeling refreshed.
Good. Yeah, Jarrett is living in London now, and today he's going to talk about a subject very close to my heart because I spent a big chunk of my life living in other countries, and he's also going to be talking about Africa, where I've never been, and I'm really excited to hear about that. And that's where he spends most of his time these days when he's not in London. But I think the best way to introduce you, Jarrett, would be to play the little video we made about you after you visited us. Is that okay?
Great.
became a documentary photographer after I left the business world, and I wanted to travel. I thought I had an artistic sensibility, photographic sensibility, and I did some work for a NGO that was specialized in environmental projects. They thought I did a decent enough job, and I wanted to continue. That when you're a photographer, you get to see a lot and document a lot. But for me, I've always felt like a spectator on the outside, and seeing people in these communities, I felt like I wanted a closer human connection. And I thought that, well, maybe I could do both. Continue my career as a documentary photographer at the same time. Learn the skills to work with people who are in distress, who are in need. I got involved with an NGO that I eventually became the vice president of, and I did a lot of photographic work for that NGO. The Denad Project set up medical clinics, microcredit programs, educational programs, small remote parts of the developing world. I started a new project as of July, this past July. It's called TEAM, the Empathic Entrepreneur Equality Mission. We're about to have 3 sites in the developing world where we empower immigrant refugees living in the developed world with financial and operational support to go back to their home country to support a community in the form of microloans, medical care, and in educational programs. A holistic program to help these remote, impoverished communities. Is a degree in clinical social work. Good as a background in the international arena. I'm thinking about being with the client at an internship here, and I have this visual in my head of the client in this shelter with his family, and I think having the engagement skills and the empathy training in that shelter in the Bronx can be taken anywhere. So if you have a sense of adventure and you want to combine sense of adventure and empathic aptitude, sure, it can work very well.
Mary Leah, you're muted.
Yeah, your pictures are so moving, Jared. They say more than 1,000 words. It's my privilege to start us off by asking a few questions from my non-specialist perspective before we hand off to our professor, Lynn Background. She's a member of our faculty who specializes in doing social work in Africa. So my first question for you, Jared, is I saw that Anthony Bourdain had a interview in the New Yorker this week, and he said he grew up in New Jersey and he'd never really gone abroad as a kid. I know you grew up in New Jersey. Are you from a family like that never went abroad? I'm just curious how some of us choose an international life and choose to spend so much of our adult lives on airplanes.
Well, I can't cook like Anthony Bourdain, and yes, I haven't. The first time I went abroad was when I was 14 years old. So I did not grow up in an internationally oriented family.
Yeah, nor did I. Yeah, so where do you think this desire to have a global life came from?
Well, I've always been interested in how other people live and think, and in terms of helping others, it feels great to help others, and to help others in a foreign, adventurous context is even greater. And so I think putting those two desires together sort of led me abroad.
Yeah, you mentioned in the film you had a formative experience in the Bronx when you were a social work student at our school. And I guess part of me is wondering, why wouldn't you choose to stay here and do work? Because obviously the United States needs social workers too.
Well, yeah, I had a great experience in the Bronx, and the imagery that stays in my head from some of the client work that I was fortunate to have while in the Bronx um, goes with me wherever I go, in a sense. But I think, I believe in global citizenry, and for me to be able to help someone in a foreign place and do it in a very with a great human return on investment is sort of what I want to accomplish. Um, if I can, have a more empathic life from a feeling perspective, from a cognitive perspective, if I can strive to help make a planet that's more equal for the members living in this world, and if I can put into action, those are my three goals. I call them the three E's: empathy, entrepreneurialism, and equality. And with those three E's, I've started an organization, a nonprofit called TEAM. T with three E's and an M. The equality, the empathic equality, the empathic entrepreneur equality mission.
Right, but I just want to point out we have a photo on the screen. I think that's from some of the work you did in the United States. What is that photo of?
That's a photo of 2 years after the Katrina tragedy in New Orleans. Had the opportunity to go into many of the abandoned homes in the Ninth Ward in the hardest hit area of New Orleans, and I took many photos of left behind objects that symbolize not only a natural catastrophe, but a man-made one, given the aftermath of the great inequality that exists in many parts of here in the U.S.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a photo of Jarrett's. This is also from the Katrina series that we have in our calendar. We just created a 2017 calendar that features our social work graduates who are also artists. There seems to be a strong connection between social work and art, which is got to be the topic of another online event. But I want to quickly ask you my last question before we hand over to Lynn, which is, how is a white male perceived in Africa? Because as I understand it, your team project is trying to empower women. And I guess there's a question inside my question, which is how can you make sure that you're doing something that doesn't clash with local culture, traditions, knowledge, and needs?
Well, Africa is a big place. It's the second biggest continent. So there's many different types of cultures within Africa. With regards to my situation, I've had tremendous opportunities with people that I've been treated in a fantastic way. And in Africa, the fault lines of the division are between genders for a lot of Africa. Men and women are the divide, and it's oftentimes a very patriarchal society. So if you can empower women, they're the real change agents, and they can can create a more progressive and prosperous society. So what our organization tries to do is empower women to be those catalysts for change.
Yeah, that's great. Good to talk to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. So at this point, I'd like to invite up Professor Lynn Mikolopoulos, who is one of our esteemed Columbia School of Social Work professors and also founded the Global Health and Mental Health Unit of our Social Intervention Group. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And if you could hold your mic up closer to your mouth, please. Just,
is that a little bit better?
Yeah,
okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm so excited to be a part of this online event and to also share this event with Jared, who has done some really great work. And also to see, like just in the chat, the amazing work that so many individuals have done thus far and where people are headed. So what I'd like to do just for the next couple of moments is just kind of share an overview of how I got into doing this work and some of the main lessons learned for individuals that are interested in potentially getting involved in doing global social work. So I've always been interested in working with those that are suffering, particularly trauma-affected and vulnerable populations. and specifically really interested in mental health suffering. And what I've learned through my clinical work and through research is that often, especially in low middle income contexts, economic functioning is focused on, or physical health. And rarely, the main issue that gets kind of left behind is psychosocial functioning and mental health functioning. And we know from research that this is often intertwined with economic functioning and just overall health and well-being. And so my goal is then to look at ways to address mental health suffering and global health and global context, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. And so my research focus has been primarily looking at how trauma outcomes, so post-trauma symptoms, how they vary across different cultural contexts, and also looking at the relationship between trauma, mental health, and substance use, and how it's related to HIV risk among key affected populations. For example, I've done a lot of work in Zambia with female fish traders, as well as with truck drivers. So one of the main lessons that I've learned through my work thus far is that it's really, really important to remain connected and to build relationships. So, I got started working on a project, doing an evaluation of a project in Zambia. And through that project, just remain connected to folks on the ground, individuals that work for the Ministry of Health, NGOs, and have been able to build my research and connections from that. And so I've expanded to doing some work in Uganda as well as in South Africa. And so I would really highlight, I think this is important for any profession, but I would really highlight that especially in this type of this work, that it's really important to remain connected to folks and to build those relationships. The second lesson learned throughout my professional career is that really that context matters and culture matters. I will say that I believe that there are many aspects that we share as human beings. However, we have a lot of mental health interventions that we know work and have a lot of evidence behind them. However, we can't just go to Zambia and say, like, okay, we know TFCBT works, so we're just going to go and do it there. The cultural context matters. It really matters in terms of hearing the voice of individuals within that setting in terms of what the needs are and what will be feasible and relevant for them. So that's the second point, that really it's really important, whether you're doing clinical work, working with an NGO, doing research, that to really focus into the context. Third, I would say, and it's something that Mary Leah asked of Jared in terms of why not do social work here in the United States. There are folks suffering globally, in New York City, in Washington D.C. So there are folks that are suffering everywhere. So why not do work here where I'm from? And I think that I would answer that in terms of saying, it's a personal decision for me. I believe that I am a global citizen. At the same time, context does matter. But it really, what drives me and what kind of wakes me up in the morning is being able to be in different contexts, learn from others that see the world differently, that have a different perspective, that just may have a different experience. And so that's why I do the work that I do globally. And finally, one thing that Mary Leah asked of Jared in terms of being a white male, being an African American woman doing work in Zambia has been really interesting to me, and something that I focus on quite a bit in the classes that I teach. I teach clinical courses as well as global social work courses, is really focusing in on aspects of your identity. And I hold on to the fact that I'm an African American woman, and that identity is very important to me. However, I know that shifts and change, that can shift and change depending on the context. And so that it's really important to understand how others may view me. So when I'm in Zambia, I'm seen as a Westerner. I may be seen, I've been called a white person before, I've been called colored. And so, race is not constructed in the same way. And so understanding that, and also really realizing that issues of power and privilege and oppression, that can shift and change too, is in terms of where you are in terms of the context. And so with that, what I would like to do is to bring Jared back on. And what I'd like to do is to look at some of the, the audience participation. If we can take a look at some of the polls. And so for the
Sorry, I'm just going to pop in and say, Lynn, your volume is a lot lower than Jarrett's, and I know that your computer is set to maximum. So if you could manually hold up during this period, yep, thank you. That'd be perfect.
Okay, no problem. So the first question that we have for the discussion are, what are the 3 most important things to consider when preparing for global social work? And so we see here that the answers are coming in, and there are a lot of folks that are saying it's important to understand your motivation. And I wholeheartely agree with that, that it's really important that you understand and take time out to reflect. Why do I want to do this work? What does it mean to me? And that, it's not about just going in and me as a researcher, it's not just going in and saying like, oh, like I'm going to do this survey and get some information, but it's about really hearing the voice of individuals, and being able to make a difference. So I don't know if Jarrett, you had some thoughts on understanding your motivation?
Yes, well, I think, domestically or abroad, understanding one's motivation is paramount. So I think it applies everywhere.
Right. And also, along those same lines, we have a number of folks that answered with developing cultural humility. That's a concept that I really focus in on in terms of teaching, and that I've reflected on myself. There's a lot of discussion about cultural competence, and for me, cultural competence is not something that can ever really be done. So I can't go and say that, I've worked with truck drivers in Zambia for years, and so I know that community and that culture, and so I got it down. There's so many aspects of, Zambian culture and in general that I'm not, that I may never fully understand. And so I think that developing cultural humility is extremely important, because I feel like that there's a difference, and that you're really stepping back and just being open to hearing others' voice and learning from others, and realizing that it's an ongoing process. Jared, do you have?
Yeah, well, I would say that, no one can never be too humble. And if you're going to error, I would say error on being too humble, because as a person, especially in a foreign context, listening skills are absolutely critical, more so than in one's normal routine life. So cultural immunity is part of being competent.
Right, exactly, and that it's an ongoing process. And similar, we have lots of folks that have answered with understanding your responsibility to the people and nation where you're working. So I think that goes along with the cultural humility and understanding your own motivation. I think it goes hand in hand, so that, it's not about your needs, but it's about really being open to understanding what the needs are of the populations that you're working with, learning from the populations, and understanding what will be at their best interest. Have you had experience with that in terms of the NGO the organization that you're running, Jared?
Oh, most definitely. I have to come in. I have to go to a place, a community, and I try to be as humble as possible. And I am there to learn and to respond to people and the community's needs rather than to impose. So it's about it's active listening skills, which I've learned at Columbia, were immensely important.
Right. And I think that can be done in many different ways, whether it's you're doing focus groups or to really understand what the needs of the community are. I think also on the other side, I can say that with the female fish traders that I've worked with in Zambia, after I did a qualitative interview about what their needs were, what were some of the traumatic events that they experienced, what were some of the mental health problems, I presented this information to a number of NGOs, as well as a number of ministries there in Zambia. And it was really fascinating that a number of high-level officials from the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Community Development, came up to me afterwards and said that was unbelievable because we had no idea that this was the experience of female fish traders. We go to the market and try to get the lowest cost possible from the women there, and not realizing what their experience is like and everything that they have to go to. So I think that it's a part of our responsibility is dissemination, and building up capacity and making sure that the programs and what we're doing is sustainable. So I think that's also another important piece. So if we can then move to the second question for the poll for the audience interaction. For those who want to work globally, what's stopping you from doing it today? So let's see what some of the responses may be. So we have a couple so far with fear and money, not knowing where to start, finances. So let's start with the fear and money. So it is I think that's a natural and healthy way of looking at doing something new, that there could be some anxiety there, and the money is an important component as well. I would say that I think that it's really important, and it seems like just looking at just glancing through some of the chat that's happening, that can be, you can build on your experience. I think it's really important to volunteer. Volunteering your time, whether it's just volunteering here in the United States. One thing that you can do is volunteering your time working with organizations. If research is your interest, looking at the type of research that folks are doing, like doing global health or doing global social work, and volunteering time of like, hey, can I help you with this project? So that's something that can be done, and then that can build on itself, where you may have more opportunities for paid experiences. Jared, do you have any comments in terms of fear and money?
Yeah, well, if you go into social work, we all know we're not going into it for the money. So, but it's always nice to get money if we can in the field. But yeah, I think volunteering is a great way to get involved in the field, and I think you have to shift your mindset in terms of instead of being paid in monetary units, we're paid in gratification units, and volunteering is definitely a way to enter and navigate within the field. I mean, there are obviously organizations like the Peace Corps that have become a model for other volunteer organizations, and with that kind of experience, it should give one who wants to be in NGO work in the developing world great opportunities in the near and longer term future.
Right. Yeah, I agree, and and I think that answers some of the concerns of looking for an entry level position, so volunteering and hard to find a focus. The more volunteer work, just starting someplace, you may find like, oh, I'm actually not so interested in that, but they may lead you to somewhere else. It's interesting that someone wrote that, I have a family right now, but when the teenagers are off to college, would like to do more work globally. I think the other thing that I would say, just from personal experience, is that having support is really important. Whether it's friends, family. I actually have a 9 and 6-year-old, and I'm actually headed off to Zambia on Friday for 2 weeks. And so having a very supportive partner that can take care of the kids while and play that role is really important. But also just having a really good support system, I think, is important in terms of doing this work, because it's hard. It's hard to travel a lot, and like Mary Leah mentioned, like being on long flights is hard, and it can put a lot of wear and tear on the body. But having that support, I think, is in self-care, I think, is really important. And so another thing that folks mentioned is how to get connected. So I think that it's really about just making those initial contacts. I can say that a number of students have reached out to me to say like, hey, I'm interested in some of the work that you're doing. And then, we work together to find some way that they can help out in a project that I'm doing, and that gives them some experience. So I don't know, Jared, if you want to speak to, how to actually get started and what that experience was like for you.
Well, for me, getting started, I thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I wanted to be an entrepreneur where I can be empathic for the cause of equality, and that led me to being involved with an organization called the Danaan Project, in which we set up. Danaan is a community in Ethiopia near the Somali border. Danaan actually means bitter in the Somali language. So what we tried to do was help make it a place named bitter sweeter, and with that we had a holistic program where we provided microcredit programs mainly to women's groups, women cooperatives. We provided medical care, free medical care, and we also provided educational programs in the primary school. Food and education was sort of a combined mission. I'm still with the Danaan Project, but in addition to that, I formed an organization, as I mentioned before, called Team, and we're trying to do the same thing, but by helping refugees or immigrants who have come to the developed world to then go back to their home community in the developing world,
Right.
to provide a holistic programs and solutions.
That's great. And so why don't we move to the next one? If Jarrett, you want to take this?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Which of these three is the most important for a global entrepreneur? Time, passion, vision. And I obviously the numbers are coming in.
Changing is right.
Numbers are coming in. It looks like our most recent election, most recent national election. And so, okay, it looks like passion has won the day in this poll, but vision is coming up. And well, for me, although passion, seems to be the number one overriding most important feature, for me it was vision of how do I get the best return on human investment possible in terms of, and how do I increase my ability to be more empathic in the world for a more equal world. And that was, as I mentioned before, the why I started this organization, this nonprofit called Team, the Empathic Entrepreneur Equality Mission. And so what we tried to, and that was based on a vision of really how do I get the biggest bang for the buck, and how to provide the most value units. We help a community in a holistic fashion by providing health care, by providing microcredit loans, by providing food and education to students in primary schools so that they do go to class, that they do learn. How do I do this with the least amount of money possible? Well, we have an infrastructure where we're all volunteers and all the monies go to the projects. So, for example, in a place like Burkina Faso, Team's first mission, for $25,000, we can treat 5,000 patients, many of whom have suffered from malaria, respiratory problems, gastrointestinal problems. We can support women's businesses, food and agricultural businesses. We can provide food for a primary school with 137 students so that they will go to class, that they will learn, and they will hopefully have a brighter future going forward. This can all be done for $25,000. So for me, it's about opportunity costs and allocation of resources, which is a big part of it's a huge part of why I'm involved in this. Because for $25,000, I'd much rather help 4,000 people than to buy a used car that will take me from A to B.
Right.
It's just a question of priorities and allocation of resources, and what I, at the end of my life, want to feel that I can accomplish.
Hmm.
So
That's great. I'm interested to if you could talk just a little bit about like because I know you're a clinical student,
Mm.
and how that's impacted the work that you're doing and or how being a clinical student can how that influences being a global social entrepreneur.
Well, it's interesting because I use the word empathy and I think of that as a feeling. I use it,
Hmm.
and I use the term equality and I think of that as a thought. And I use the term social entrepreneurialism and I think of that as a behavior.
Hmm.
Clinically, that those are the ingredients of CBT, very much a clinical social work um, paradigm. And so, how could I, as a recent clinical social work alum of Columbia School of Social Work, implement that in a foreign context in which many people can benefit? And so that I think the program Columbia gave me the maybe the direct or even indirect inspiration for me to do that. And so even though I have sort of a management administrative post, the clinical work is very much involved in what I do in Africa.
Hmm. That's great. That's great. That's really cool to see, especially as a clinical practice faculty member. It's great to see how that has influenced the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I guess we could go to the next question. If
sure.
so, I have started this organization. It's called Team. We have 3 projects in 3 African nations: Burkina Faso, Senegal, and Ethiopia. And as I mentioned before, I think we have a great return on human investment in which we can invest approximately $25,000-$30,000 to create a site to help literally thousands of people. But I would like in five years or so to have 10 sites in the 40 poorest countries in the world, out of 180 countries. And I would like to see what the audience thinks that I can do in order to achieve that. And 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 I think what's very important is that we increase the value of any organization that seeks to increase the value and its niche. And so I'm looking for answers in order to do that. Seek volunteers, sure. Well, I would love to get bright minds from Columbia School of Social Work, students or alumni who can present innovative ideas and solutions to what I'm doing. Um, well, yes, I'd love to have partnerships, and looking at the poll here, love to have partnerships with the universities such as Columbia, or businesses that put a priority on corporate responsibility. I know that, for example, Goldman Sachs has the 10,000 Women's Program where they give microloans to women all over the world. By the way, the payback rate for microfinancing in Africa is staggeringly high, almost 100%. So I'd like to do more of that in more countries as soon as possible. Yes, we'd like to get grants. In order to get grants, the organization has to increasingly become more valuable and increasingly stand out amongst the many, many organizations that exist out there.
It's
In
interesting what
term,
someone said to allow I'm sorry that
Go
allow
ahead.
CSS to allow a block placement to work with you, which may be something to think about for the future. I think the more
Well,
opportunities that we can have connected for students would be great.
well, that would be terrific because most important, a very important thing for me is that a young person gets involved, learns from their experience, so they can apply that experience with their whole working lifetime ahead of them. So if I, for example, could get high school students involved in what I'm doing, and so that a 14, a 16, an 18-year-old can have the opportunity to innovatively create programming, marketing to reach people in great need, I will feel great that I've given that person an opportunity to reevaluate what they may want to do going forward in the future.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, well, there's so many things. I'd love to, partnerships are obviously a big part of growth in any endeavor, and would love to do that with universities, again, with universities and businesses. And again, so little goes so far in what we do that really it should be a no-brainer for an organization that wants to increase its corporate responsibility profile.
Yeah, and even international organizations, one of my main partners in Zambia has been the International Organization for Migration, and it seems to be a good fit for the work that you're doing, especially with women who are immigrants.
I mean, especially in today's political climate, if we can sell the idea of pluralism, openness, inclusivity, helping women, helping kids here in the developed world, give them an opportunity to make an impact in the developing world, and knowing and helping within the community, both medically, educationally, and in economic empowerment terms. It's a bundled package that can be done, again, and I hate to sound like a broken record, for so much for so little. And so that's, in having a volunteer infrastructure, all the monies go to the project, and would like to keep it that way.
Hi again.
Hi.
This is my cue to say that it's time for Q&A, because we wanted to make sure that our participants have a chance to ask our speakers some questions. So I'll be the voice of the folks asking questions, and I'll read out questions from chat. And Catherine, you're asking about the handouts. We'll get to that in the last few minutes of the session, and then also we will send them out afterwards. So we had a question earlier from Catherine, and Lynn, this might be for you. But Jared and Lynn, maybe you could do I've got it when you hear a question you want to answer. So for those who require being in Africa for much longer periods than 2 weeks, do you have any suggestions for how to meet the demands of having a family?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not an easy answer. I think the longest trip that I've had, I believe it was last year, that I went to, I was in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, Masaka and Rakai and Uganda and Zambia, and Lusaka for, I think it was 3.5 weeks total. And it was hard on my family, but and I've had many conversations with folks on planes and expats about doing this work, and it's really interesting because I can't imagine doing this work without technology. And sometimes when I first started going to Zambia, sometimes my computer would work in the room, but my phone would only work outside of my room, and so it's always a challenge, and internet wasn't always so great. But the fact that I can Skype with my kids every day, and with FaceTime and WhatsApp and all of that, it's easy to remain connected. In that sense, obviously it's not the same of being able to hug your kids and spouse in person. But I think that using technology is one way to kind of overcome some of the barriers and challenges. And again, having support around you. I mean, my in-laws live close by, my sister-in-law, and so it's also that's also been a help for my partner here with my children.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy fix. Sorry.
No, it doesn't sound easy. Dasha has a burning question, which in our dress rehearsal, you both had really good responses for. So I wonder if you could share. So have you both learned the languages of the countries you work in? And do you think you can do work without having the language?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll take this one. Initially anyway. Um, well, it's impossible to learn, all the languages. But if you're going to learn any of the words in any of the languages, make sure you learn please, thank you, you're welcome, hello, and goodbye. And I think more importantly, you tend to use non-verbal sort of gestures more so than you would normally. Domestically because you have to, and importantly, it's very important to show interest, and you can do that non-verbally, and that's what starts a very positive ball rolling, for lack of a better way of putting it. Because once they see you're interested, it's reciprocated, and a relationship starts that way.
I would also build on that by saying I've learned very few words and particularly in the work that I've done with in Zambia, and there are and I may be getting this number wrong, but I know it's over 80 local dialects that there are in Zambia. English is commonly spoken. I think it's the official language, but in some rural contexts, folks don't speak English if they don't have access to education or learning English in schools. And so, but one thing that I think that has been really important in terms of the work that I do, I've never done any of the individual interviews that I've done. I work closely with local partners who speak the language, and so that there's a comfort level there. Because I think that that's really important. I think that a lot can be lost in translation, especially at the trust level. But I try to be on the ground and meet folks who I'm getting information from as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this is a question that might be on a few people's minds. This is from Moira. How do you think the newly proposed immigration policies under the new presidential administration will impact your work in the future?
I can start by saying it's concerning. I would say I've had many conversations with colleagues and local partners, and it'll be interesting to see what the response will be like when I'm in Zambia. But with America First, with the rhetoric of America First and Make America Great Again, then it's hard to, it's concerning to me of terms of, will funding be available? Will there be this interest in maintaining relationships, maintaining these connections? But you know what? I've come to the point where although I still have concerns on many different levels, that we all just have to push forward and continue doing the work that we're doing. And continue to build on those relationships and to try to build capacity with the resources that we have available to us currently, and as social workers, doing what we need to do to make a difference, to change things that we don't think are right, or things that we think are unjust.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to just add that, team just opened a site in the Somali region of Ethiopia, and we are selecting an immigrant, to manage the project, but the immigrant will come from Canada and not the U.S. And that's partially due to the fact that the new immigration policy is unfortunately restrictive.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Lynn mentioned earlier about social work skills. So how do social work skills tie into doing global work?
I would say that it's really I think that social workers really have a unique perspective that can be and we can really be on the forefront in terms of doing global work. If we think about some of the ways that some of the values and perspectives that we hold as social workers, so looking at starting at where the client's at, looking at the person within their environment. So looking at from the micro to the macro and looking at structural level interventions, those are all parts that are very important to social work. that can really be beneficial to individuals in different contexts.
Just to add, as a recent alumni of Columbia School of Social Work, I think the skills you learn in social work school is a way of refining a certain aptitude towards a certain empathy or empathy towards a certain culture or people and so forth. So I think it refines an attitude that's already within you with more specific skills. And I think without my experience at Columbia, I would not have possibly have started this organization, which is helping thousands of people.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple people piggybacking off of each other with questions. So if you don't have a lot of financial resources to volunteer, how would you recommend breaking into the field of international social work? And is there a particular type of organization or region that would be meaningful for future employers?
Jared, would you like to?
Sure. Well, I mean, to not be able to afford to volunteer, I think means there's something else happening in your life that's preventing you from doing it, because you don't need any money to volunteer. So I don't understand not being able to volunteer. It's just a different. You have to shift your mindset and say to yourself, I'm going to take the following weeks, the following months, the following years, and volunteer and contribute and get something back from it. And hopefully with that experience, then have certain qualifications to go into the developing world in some capacity and draw a salary.
And I think I would add as well that, being able to, I think everyone's individual situation is different in terms of, being able to volunteer, whether it's a week or 6 months in a different context may not be realistic or feasible for many individuals for a number of different reasons. But I think, as Jared was mentioning in terms of volunteering, your time, here in the States, but being involved with issues that are related to doing global work is maybe more feasible. And so doing that while you're working, even if it's just, an hour a month or, whatever it is, I think that, even slowly getting into the field. And, one other thing that I think can be really helpful in terms of if you don't have if you don't have access or the ability to actually be on the ground, is to talk to individuals in different organizations that are doing the type of work you may be interested in. So having the informational interviews can be really helpful. Just asking, what is your day-to-day experience doing the work that you're doing? What is it like to be on the ground doing the work? What advice do you have for me? Here's my background. Here's where I want to go. What advice do you have for me? So those, it takes a lot of time. But I think that can be extremely valuable.
I would just add, yeah, I think that's very apt, and you start slow and build up and see what you want to volunteer in, what context, and because you have to start somewhere, and volunteering is be it in development work or other areas, it's a very good way to test out the field and test it out pretty quickly.
So we have an interesting question from Alex from earlier. So she's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, American-raised Caucasian woman. And she says, my problem is trying to figure out what role I could possibly have in international social work that is most ethical and respectful of the cultures I'm interested in serving. After spending some time in northern Thailand with trafficking survivors, I know I want to work with this population, but I don't know how to navigate it responsibly. Do you have any advice?
I think that having that awareness is the first step. to that it's not about like, hey, I want to do this work, and not being aware of your identity and how that may influence the work that you're doing. You know, I spend I teach a course on advanced clinical practice, health, mental health, and disabilities, and we spend the first portion of the course looking at issues of identity and how that may impact the therapeutic relationship. And that's whether or not you're working with someone in New York City or, you know, someone in Zambia. And so I think that being aware of who you are and how that may impact your work, and that's different for everyone, and really being aware of issues of power and privilege, and how, again, like some of the things that I'd mentioned in the brief talk that I did, you know, and how that may shift in different contexts. But you know, I think that really being thoughtful, and bringing with you the concept of cultural humility, can be something that can be really advantageous, and you know, and really wanting to hear the voice of the folks that you're working with. Those are all really key components to, I believe, doing good work.
Mhm.
Yeah, just to add that, you know, the fact that she's aware, she's she's because of self-awareness, she doesn't have much to worry, I think, and that should be a confidence builder, and she's already there. You're already there.
All right, we have time for one more question. So I'm going to join two together because they're related. So Tammy asks, she attended the last webinar, which was on telebehavioral health, and she wonders, is this type of social work being implemented internationally, or is it still quite new? And then Moira asks, do you have any suggestions about the best way to bring electronic media to those in developing areas if we're local in the US so we can communicate with those we like to serve? And it's pretty apt since we're here with people from all over the world all together in this event.
I'll defer to you, Lynn.
Okay. Yeah, I think that in terms of use of media and technology, that it's you know, it can be very relevant, and can be very useful in different contexts. I've had preliminary discussions on developing an intervention with truck drivers who are at risk for HIV, who have mental health and substance use issues in Zambia, of developing a mobile app for them to use because they're on the road. And so doing like a 4-session individual session is just not relevant, and just wouldn't work. And so I think that that can be done. And I've seen more and more the use of you know, using apps and doing behavioral health interventions like through mobile apps has been quite relevant in the work that I've been doing.
Mm.
Well, I'd like to thank you both very much for your time, and we really appreciate all your insights and the stories that you were sharing. I'm going to close with a few final points of information. One is for those who want the handouts, they're here on the left. You just click on the name of the handout and you can click on download files, and we'll also send them out to everyone who registered along with the recording. And we hope that you'll come to our future events. You can get on our mailing list by going to our website, and the recordings of our past events, depending on if they were live streamed or if they were this kind of an event, are either on our live stream account or our YouTube account. And then here are 2 global themed events that are coming up. These are not online. These are physical events for CEUs here at the School of Social Work. And I want to say a giant thank you and ask for any feedback that you might have. So I'm going to open up a couple polls. We'd love to know what your key takeaways were from the event. And if you have any feedback, we would love to take that into account as well. And a special thank you to our speakers and to all the folks in chat who've been sharing really wonderful resources and stories and information and experiences as well. So our formal event is concluding, but we'll stick around for 10, 20 minutes just to do some informal chit chat. And you all may want to be networking with each other as well. If there's someone in the chat that you wanted to ask questions of, you can maybe connect now in the chat. And I see some people are starting to share email addresses. So thank you to everybody here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there were a couple questions we didn't get to, so I'm going to throw them out now to see if. So we had Tina ask, mental health is sometimes associated with witchcraft. How do you handle those kind of beliefs?
So I can answer that question. Yeah, and it's really important that you understand mental health and how and mental health suffering and problems are conceptualized in the context. And so if it's related to that, and there is a way that we can join with witch doctors or medicine men, medicine men or medicine women, usually medicine men, to implement interventions, then I think that that could be a possibility. It actually reminds me of an interesting story that I heard once at a conference, and I don't want to say exactly where this was because I don't remember exactly, but I know it was in sub-Saharan Africa, and I believe it was in Kenya. But there was a remote village that a doctor was working in, and they had doctors that were from the States and from the Netherlands that were there to try to treat epilepsy. But the individuals in the community were saying we don't want anyone to take the medication because it's not about what this it's not about epilepsy. When someone has like seizures, it's because there's a snake in their brain. And so it's not, so we're not going to take the medication because that's not helping what the actual problem is. And so one of the doctors said, you know what, I think that makes sense. But this medication that we have actually helps the snake sleep. And so, working with the individuals and from their perspective of saying like, okay, if this is what the belief is, this is what the reality is. And not trying to say like, okay, well, obviously there's no snake really alive in your brain, like having that perspective, but really joining in with the community and saying like, okay, if there's a snake, like we know a way of calming the snake, of making the snake go to sleep, and so you won't have the seizures. And so that enabled the community to buy in to taking the medication that could be helpful for those that were suffering from epilepsy.
Thank you. That's a really interesting story.
Hmm.
So we had a question from Michelle. She's currently working with refugees from DRC that have recently resettled in the US, and she's facilitating a women's support group. We've added some creative therapy aspects to the group, including knitting and basket weaving, and the clients are really excited about this, but may lack the desire to be self-sufficient. Some of the clients are expecting them as social workers to give what they think they need. Do you have any advice on how to address that kind of a situation?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the last piece.
Some of our clients are expecting us as social workers to get them what they think they need rather than being self-sufficient.
Oh, I see. I see. One way could be of having conversations about what does it mean for you to be self-sufficient, and really trying to build the internal ability to help with individuals feeling like, I can do this, and this is the way that I can do this that will be feasible and relevant for me. So trying to elicit some of that, opposed to and really just having conversations about, it's not, this group or what we're doing is not about us doing for you. It's about, everybody like kind of helping themselves and us working together, and it's about a partnership. And realizing that and also having discussions of, you as the women in the group, what's going to work best for you individually. You know that more than I do. I mean, it's like doing work with someone here in the States. If you're doing clinical work and the person's like, well, just tell me what to do. That's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to work for them. It's like kind of the motivational interviewing type way of thinking of, it's not about us just saying, okay, well, you just stop drinking. Like, well, what's going to work for you to stop drinking? Like, what your ability and what your needs are. What's going to work for you. What's going to be feasible. So really trying to elicit that within the individual and the clients.
Thank you. So Alex asked, in regards to the international trauma field, can either of you identify the most dire needs, either on a micro or a macro level?
Jared, do you want to feel like I'm
I'll
back?
try to. Well, most what I'm involved with now is there's not so much trauma or directly trauma. It's more medical illnesses. In terms of, I really wouldn't know how to answer that question. Um, yeah, I wouldn't know how to answer that question.
Mm.
I would say in terms of the what my one of the main focuses of my work has been to develop new ways of assessing trauma symptoms. And so one of the things that I have found along with some of my other colleagues is that post-trauma symptoms, usually in non-Western low and middle income context, are usually assessed with scales that measure post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder was it is a disorder that was developed based on Vietnam vets, mostly white male. And so can we take those assessments and then just plop them down in other contexts? And are we assessing symptoms that are actually relevant? And so what I've done in the last couple of years is a big project to develop a new way or a scale of assessing global post-trauma symptoms. And we're now actually validating and testing that scale both in Uganda and South Africa. And what we found is that many of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are actually relevant across different contexts. And so there are actually core symptoms that we all experience when or are likely to may experience or may be at risk of experiencing if we've been exposed to a traumatic event. However, in different contexts, there are different symptoms that may be more relevant. The concept of thinking too much. A lot of somatic complaints are more prevalent in different regions of the world. And so it's really important to take that into account. And I think that there's a real need for that because there's a lot of assumptions that are made that the way we do things here and the way that we measure trauma symptoms, because if people are suffering, then they need the help. And so ways of assessing that can then inform intervention development and so on and so forth.
Thank you. I echo Tina's comment that says, Lynn, that was very insightful.
Oh, thank you.
So Emmanuel asks, I'm interested in creating programs which will address both mental health and disability issues in the developing world, starting from the DRC, my country of birth. Any advice on the track to pursue at Columbia?
Well, if I may, I'll answer that. Being a recent graduate, I would say take the track that most interests you intellectually, and rather than be strategic about a different field that may not be as close to your heart. So I would say follow your heart, and it will take you to where you want to be strategically later on.
So that ties back to the poll about passion, vision, or time. So
I think so.
mhm.
I think so. I mean, I went the clinical track, but now I think more in a macro sort of management point of view perspective.
So Tammy asks, tying into the witchcraft question, what's the best approach to handling mental health issues in countries with a huge stigma against it? I'm interested in working for organizations dismantling the stigma in my motherland, South Korea, which is infamous for looking down on mental illness.
I think one of the ways on a larger scale, although I'm a more micro person, is education. And so educating individuals that, mental illness is not something that's made up. It's not something that, people, like, well, they're not, depression's not really a thing, anxiety is not really a thing. So the more people understand that it's something that it's similar to diabetes or similar to HIV. It's similar to physical health problems. It's that it's not something that's made up, and people are really suffering from it. And I think also understanding, so even helping at the government level of helping individuals and societies understand more, and I think that this goes for the United States as well, that the impact of mental illness on people's functioning, and if it's necessary, the impact on economics, that people's ability to work, and what this costs societies and families and individuals. I think it can be one way of approaching it. So education and really understanding the public health impact, and that just understanding that it's similar to physical health problems.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the questions are trickling away, and it's turning into mostly thank yous and connecting, which is great. And I see that some folks have shared their email addresses for if anyone wants information. For example, Michelle has shared hers, Stephanie's shared hers, and there's some others. Meryl has shared hers for anyone interested in resettlement in Chicago. And Joanne has shared hers. So thank you to everybody who's willing to connect. And thank you very much to our speakers today for volunteering. We had, dress rehearsals and meetings and preparation for this event on top of the event itself, so it was a big time commitment. We really thank you for that. And thanks to everyone who was here.
Thank you for having me be a part of it. Thank you, Jared.
Thanks a lot. It was great to be part of it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to wave goodbye, and I'm going to stop the recording. And big thanks to everybody.
Great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.